Hey everyone, Sim from the Future here, and welcome to part 3 of the drum sequencing with voltage modular and micro bundle. This is going to be a little bit of an odd one. So before we get into this, a quick little disclaimer. I don't have any diplomas in piano, and my music theory knowledge is rather limited. So I'm probably going to explain some things in not the most technically correct way, but I think it's the most understandable way, which is important as well. Another quick disclaimer is that there will be a few modules in this demo which are, as of today, not released yet. They're still in the beta stage, so they are prone to change a little bit, maybe get some fixes, that sort of stuff. So if you're trying to follow along, you are not going to succeed at this very specific point in time. Before we reach this kind of point of madness, we need to do a few steps back because this is a bit much. So let's just yeah, there we go. So the topics of today, pretty straightforward. We're going to talk a little bit about polymeters, odd time, and polyrhythms. Now, before we can talk about this, we need to go back a few steps, and we need to talk a little bit about meters, bars, and that sort of stuff. Now, this might seem to be a pretty straightforward thing until you actually start to think about it, and it gets a little bit more complicated. So let me just quickly patch this up, and I'm going to ask you a little question. And this is a pop quiz. Right. I want you to tell me what the time signature is of what you're hearing right now. If your answer is something along the lines of, well, that's impossible to tell, you have succeeded this test. Because it is, in fact, impossible to tell. This could be counted as 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you could count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's really no way of telling. It could even be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You tell me. The point here is that in order to be able to talk about any of this, you need a frame of reference. And creating a frame of reference is fairly straightforward. We just need to define what the bar is. And to do this, we just need more points. So let's create a second point. Now, this is not the most logical way to do this, but it is pretty visual. So let's throw in a kick. And what we are going to do is we are going to play a kick on the one, and that's it. But we're doing it in a little bit of a weird way. We are actually going to need a button. I forgot to grab a button. It's the age-old forgotten button. Retrig, retrig. Trigger. And retrigger. Right. Cool. And we need a mixer. I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm actually going to use this mixer. There we go. We now have a second point of reference. So now we can start to talk about what a measure is. So right now it's still technically a little bit vague because this could be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You could still argue it's 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or even 12, etc. Right? You get the gist. But in general, if there's a repetition going on, you can kind of define the repeating bit as the measure. So right now I would count this as a 4/4 bar, which is pretty standard. Now that we have this going, we can talk a little bit about our first fun little thing. And our first little thing is the odd time. Let me just throw in some blanks. So right now we're counting in 4/4. It's 4 quarter notes in a bar. It's pretty straightforward. We can very easily change this into 5/4 by just making this one beat longer. And now we have 5 quarter notes. Because this is still a little bit vague, let's get a snare in there. And now we have a nice little 5/4 time signature. Usually odd time is defined by not being able to properly divide the signature. So 5 divided by 4 gives you a weird number, so that's an odd time. 6/8 is fairly clean, so that's fine. 7/8 would be an odd time again. So let's actually listen to 7/8 for a second. We're just going to speed up the clock. Now this sort of thing is fairly easy to set up. You just need a counter to reset this sequence before it reaches its full length, basically. And you can make it as short or long as you want. So right now we have 3/8. Can make it even shorter, in which case it's essentially no longer 3/8, but it's more like 1/4, but with shorter notes. And that's your odd time patch. Alright, so with all of the boring stuff out of the way, let's take a look at some much more interesting stuff. And let's take a little look at the polymeter. Now for this patch, it's a lot of the same stuff. We have a button to reset all the sequencers and the clock. We have a new module here. This is actually a mute, so I can now actually stop a sequence, which is quite convenient. We have count, and we have a count for the different step sequencers. So the kick and the snare are connected to the first count, and we have the hi-hat connected to the second count. The third count goes to a synth, which is currently out of the image, and not important for this first part of the video. Then we have some more mutes to have control over the different parts, and we have a mix. With all the counts set to 4/4, we simply get a 4-beat loop. As you can see, after 4 beats it repeats, and I can mute parts. And stop the entire sequence. It's a little bit glitchy for some reason, but doesn't really matter that much. So yeah, what are we going to do? Now, if you want to imagine a polymeter, I think the easiest way is to think about that one band member that's really bad at counting. And when you decide to do a 4/4 song, any normal human would count it 1, 2, 3, 4, obviously. But you have that one special band member that is like, no, we need to start counting at 0. So everyone is doing 1, 2, 3, 4. And this one band member goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously, this is going to give a bit of an issue, but it's actually the kind of issue that sounds kind of cool. So with everything at 4/4, obviously, it sounds like 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Boring, but effective. So what happens if we put the hi-hat at 5? So we now get 5 counts of hi-hat and 4 counts of kick and snare. So let's take a listen. So that's interesting, right? It doesn't seem like anything is happening, but if you take a careful look, you will see that the sequencers are no longer on the same side, right? This is starting to get out of sync, gets a little bit more out of sync, until after a few repetitions, we have everything back in sync. Okay. This kind of loops back to an earlier part where I said it's all about the context. If everyone is playing everything, it basically still sounds like 4/4. And to actually make it a polymeter, you need to have something that stands out. Otherwise, you're just playing 4/4 in a very inefficient way, which will piss off most of the more classically trained community anyways. So let's make step 5 a blank step. And just because I hate myself, I am going to count along with this one in a bit of an interesting way. What we're going to do is I'm going to count 4/4, and then I'm going to count the 5 from the polymeter. So this should be interesting and mildly annoying to do, but let's see how it goes. So the first count is a fake count for some reason, and then we get into the real thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 1, 5, 3, 4, 1, 2, 5, 4, 1, 2, 3, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's weird. And the reason I hooked all this up is because you might notice when there's a snare hit but no hi-hat, it actually kind of still sounds like there's a snare hit because they are both based on noise. So let's take out the snares. Let's reset. And you can hear that shift. Now, this particular loop will find its way back home every 20 beats. That's the common denominator here. 4 times 5 is 20, so every 20 beats it will line right back up. And the stranger you make these numbers, or the larger you make these numbers, the longer it takes to get a repeat. Polymeters are pretty awesome because you keep the time the same. So every count is still within the same time. The only thing you change is where the repetition starts. And this makes it a little bit trippy. but still very usable in most musical contexts, because the count and the timing is still very much the same. It doesn't get too uncomfortable to most people, right? You can still easily count along to any of the parts without being tricked in your head. So if we were to count along with just the 4/4, we could very much do so by just waiting a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Works fine. We could do the same with the 5. If we wait for it to repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's not too tricky. Counting them both at the same time definitely trips you up. Although it's a fun little exercise. But that's basically the polymeter. You can do this in drums to create a pretty dynamic groove, but I think a lot of people like to use this with synths, because you can actually make a single sequence sound like many sequences, because the start point and the way it lines up with the beat keeps shifting. It kind of feels new with every repetition. So I made the most basic synth in the world with the most basic sequence in the world, so we can more easily track what is going on. So let's just say, let's go. We need to activate these. And right now we have everything set to 4, so everything has 4 counts. This is obviously not going to be much of a banger, but it's a good demonstration. So you can hear the tones going up, single steps, very straightforward. So right now we have 5 tones. If we move it up to 5 counts before it repeats, we will get 5 tones. Very well.
Check that out! Oh my god!
And every 20 beats, that low note will line up with the bass drum. I think it's the next one. There we go.
How sick is that?
And obviously you want to experiment a bit with this, make it a little bit more complicated than this, but this gets the job done. We can actually expand it one more step, so let's go to 6 steps. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's Polymeters in a nutshell. I think it's one of the things that is used a lot and also misnamed a lot, because a lot of people say this is a polyrhythm. It's not, because the timing is still the same. Polyrhythms are a bit of a different beast, and that's the next beast we will tackle. So let's make a polyrhythm patch and let's take a look at what's going on there. So here we are at the boss stage of the poly stuff, and that's the polyrhythm. Now for this I am using a not yet released module, which is still a little bit experimental, so it's not final, but it gives you a good idea of how to do this. And there's other modules in the store which can already do this, so if you want to recreate this right now in this very second, you can check those out, or you can wait a little bit for us to finish this module, so you can play with it once we release it. Of course, this will be part of the sequencer bundle and of the all bundle, so you will eventually get it if you own one of those bundles. Now, this patch looks a little bit more intimidating, but it's mostly the same thing. We still have our step sequencers and our generators, kick, snare, We have 2 hi-hats because I want to do an open and a closed hi-hat, and this is to make it a little bit more obvious what is going on. The hi-hats are fed into a muxer. Look back a few episodes to see how that works, and this muxer changes every 3 counts. So every 3 counts we go from an open to a closed hi-hat. 3 counts, you might ask, yes, it will make sense eventually. Next to that we have the mute, so we can mute out the bass, snare or the hats. And last but not least, of course, a mixer. Alright, so what is going on this end? We of course have the button to absolutely re-trigger everything possible, with one little change, and that's the button is being fed through the sample delay with 1 sample of delay to the divider multiplier module. That's the word. Clock divider multiplier. So what is this module doing? It's dividing and multiplying clock, obviously. What a dumb question. So right now it is dividing the clock into 4 steps for every 4 steps that come in. So it still sounds very much the way you would expect. And note that hi-hat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 for the openly closed hi-hats. Alright, cool. Nothing too spicy. Just a simple 4, so why the hell is this here? Now for this we actually need to have a little bit of talk. You might be familiar with guitar pedals, right? And many guitar pedals don't receive clock from a DAW or anything. They are just on your pedal board, and you have like a little speed control dial, which you can turn, and then the blinky light goes faster, and you know that the time goes faster or it goes slower. This works pretty well when you're playing by yourself, but if you're playing with a band that actually wants to do things in time, like having a 1/8 note delay or something like that, you need some way to have that pedal run in the same time as the rest of your band. Now, for this, the guitar makers did something pretty smart. They implemented a little button on many, or actually switch, I should say. It's a little switch on many pedals which you can press. When you press it once, it doesn't really do a whole lot. But when you press it twice, or in some cases 3 times, it will take that time between presses, and that will be the tempo the pedal is running at. After all, speed is just the amount of time between points. This module works much the same way, with some smart math stuff we're not going to get into for the sake of brevity, because otherwise this video is going to be really just too much to handle. So just think of it as the tap switch on your guitar pedal, right? And the more points you have, the more accurate your timing becomes. But the nice thing here is we're using a stable clock, so if we just take 2 points, we know exactly how fast things are going. And that's what's happening here. We have the clock going into the module. We have a little reset switch to reset the internal timing. And we, of course, have some outputs here. Now the reset on this module is a little bit odd. It actually works best when you have 1 sample of delay before it hits the reset between all the other things. This is by design, because I did discuss putting that 1 millisecond behind the little button, but Chris said, and rightfully so, it's best to not have unexpected behaviors in modules. So if you want to make this exact setup, once it's out, just add a 1 millisecond of delay, or 1 sample of delay before the reset trigger, and you're fine. All right, so now let's actually do something that is a polyrhythm. So in a polyrhythm, you're starting to mess with time, which is trickier to explain because it's a little bit tricky. Basically what we're doing is we're keeping our ones, so every 1 is still on 1, but all the notes in between get recalculated. So let's say, for instance, we have a 4/4 beat, and we set a 3/4 poly. All the ones will still line up, but there will be an equal space between the 2 and the 3 and the next one. This basically creates two different tempos, which still line up, but not entirely. And this is really hard to do with anything other than a separate clock, basically. You need to have two different times in your project, and that's where these modules come in handy. So let's make that actually happen. So let's remind ourselves quickly what 4/4 sounds like. Alright. And now let's say we have 4 counts and we want 3 notes in it. So we keep the 4 and we switch this one down to 3. Reset the entire thing. Let's wait a second. And as you can hear, that one where the height switches is still in the exact same place. So you still get 1, 1, 1. But now the hi-hats do a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. See? So there's a weird little shift going on there, which is a little bit trippy. And that's a polyrhythm, in short. Now, to actually contextualize this a little bit more, let's get in a extra sound source. And let's actually get in a steady count, so we can have the hi-hat 3s against 4s. So you can actually clearly hear that there are two different tempos at play. So let's get in a little hat. Let's get in, this is our 4/4, I assume. Yep. So we're just going to trigger it right off there. And we are going to feed that into the mixer. And we want to disable these. So at 4/4 they line up. And this is quite skanky. You can create some pretty insane beats with this. As you can hear, it's going to basically be impossible to count along with both the 4 and the 3 because they are in separate time signatures, so it's going to really trip up your brain. But for prog lovers like me, this is like catnip. It's crazily addictive to have this thing. It's just so different, and yeah. It also has the weird ability to make things very unlistenable if you add too many of these poly elements, because it just becomes kind of chaotic by nature, because you're basically introducing more different time signatures with different note lengths, and it gets a little bit messy. So let's just end off with one example of a slightly more complicated poly patch. So keep in mind, this is the amount of counts coming in, and that's the amount of counts going out. So for every 4 counts, 3 counts out. We can also do 5 counts, 3 counts. Let's just have a quick little listen. Let's actually put 5 counts on here as well. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Right, getting sidetracked, because polys are fun, and having a setup like this makes it fairly easy to experiment with. Now, getting reliable results is going to depend greatly on your theoretical knowledge, which is basically non-existent in my world, so it's very much an experimentation tool. But even just this simple experimentation can give you some pretty fun little results. Once you start to build out, you can get some pretty insane stuff like this thing where we have a bass and a synth running in polys. So we're running 3-5, 3-4 polys. It sounds a little like this. The longer you listen to it, the more you just kind of get into it. At least for me, it really works on that level. At the beginning, it's a little bit strange. It's like, whoa, what's going on? And once you find a steady thing to kind of groove along with, be it the synths, be it the bass, be it the drums, it sort of clicks together and it's just very chill. Though, of course, the tricky thing is once you start to do this thing, you need to be careful when adding elements because you're changing the amount of steps required. So, for instance, the bass here is playing 3 counts because we have 3 counts at the very left, both at the top and bottom ratio. No, actually, using the bottom as well. So these are both 3 counts, so the bass needs to be 3 counts as well, because otherwise it would sound weird. Pretty cool stuff. So that's polyrhythms. Polymeters, someone is counting too many or too few steps. Polyrhythms, someone is counting too few or too many steps, but you're still somehow magically hitting the same ones. And there you go. The most basic explanation I can give of this stuff. And if there are any questions, leave them down below and I will try my best to answer these. Expect a few more patches with polymeters and polyrhythms just for demonstration's sake, but this concludes my tech talk, and we already spent way too much time together, so it's time to say goodbye on this series, and we'll speak in the future. See ya.